Welcome, Søren Mosdal from Copenhagen, creator of numerous comics and someone who has had who's committed a full life to really bringing alive comic book storytelling in and through the visual means. Welcome, Søren.
Thank you, Doc.
So, Søren, you have kind of an interesting biography, Nairobi to Copenhagen, where you studied, fine arts, I believe, illustration arts. You also spent time in Finland, but maybe you can share a little bit about your journey and why comics? Why dedicate a life to comics?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'm asking myself that on a daily basis. I don't know. I think it says I was born in Nairobi, which is true, but I was only there for 2 years, and then we went back to Denmark, where I'm originally from. But then when I was 5, we moved to Paris in France, and I spent a lot of time reading comics in France, and this was in the 70s, and France in the 70s was like a golden age for comics. All the old school Franco-Belgium stuff like Asterix and Lucky Luke and Spirou and all that stuff was like super big, and that's what I did. After school, I went home and read all that stuff. I think that's why I got the comics bug in those years in France. I think that's where it started, because I didn't have any friends there in France. There was like a school home. All my school mates lived far away from our house, so yeah, I think that was it. And then we moved back to Copenhagen, and sorry, not Copenhagen, a little north of Copenhagen, and stayed there. Yeah. Well, should I go deeper in that? Or?
Well, so tell us how, like, what made you decide to study drawing, say, formally, and then finally, there's a difference between illustration and comic book drawing, right? Or graphic novel drawing, or in the case of your new work, the Basquait graphic biography drawing, right?
Actually, I never really. I know I write in my biography that I went to some fancy art school, but it was more like 2 days a week with the little old ladies doing watercolors, and I didn't even get like a diploma or anything. It was not anything serious at all. I just feel the urge when I do a biography to put down something that sounds official. I don't know why. It shouldn't be there. So I never really studied for real.
Well, so how did you? I mean, seriously, Søren, your work is so incredible. Clearly, there was a lot of self-discipline and a lot of self-training. A lot of, maybe you can give a kind of a brief vision of what you did to become such an incredible creator.
Well, thanks for saying that. I guess instead of going to college, I moved to Copenhagen from the small town I grew up in, and then I more or less immediately, when I was 19 or 20, found a studio, like a comic studio with other people doing my age, doing comics and illustrations, and they were all starting out like I was, and we just, taught each other maybe, or stole from each other and showed each other books. If someone found something, we would all look at that, and we kind of taught ourselves through sitting there together for, I don't know, maybe 10 years. I was in that first studio I started in. That's where I got all the tricks. Yeah.
You became more formally a part of different spaces, and also published in 1999, Gash. So maybe you can talk about those steps between kind of, autodidact creator to actually publishing your comics.
Well, that's the thing. If you want to do comics, I guess you have to, especially if you come from a place like Denmark, there's not so many options. So you maybe have to move somewhere, go somewhere else. For instance, I went to the UK and stay there for half a year with my then girlfriend, and I started in a studio in the UK, like the one in Copenhagen, just an English one with British guys. And I guess I bugged them, my new British friends, to get me in contact with the publisher, whatever. And through, do you know Paul Gravett?
Sure.
Yeah, through him, he got me in touch with a bunch of people. Well, the studio too. I think through him, I also got in touch with maybe the publisher. I can't remember. He was a big help in that very beginning. And somehow I got a guy to publish this Gash book, which is basically a collection of my first self-published little fanzine comics I did. So yeah, my point is, I think it's a good idea to go somewhere. And now it's different. Back then in the 90s, there was not really any internet to speak of, so it was maybe more important to physically move. Now you can also send them mail.
Sure, like we're doing right now. In 2000, you published Feuerwerk. Am I pronouncing that right? And then, of course, and we're going to talk about this in a second, a little bit later, Erik the Red. But yeah, was there a significant difference between, say, the work that was in Gash to your Feuerwerk, and then, as you moved into Erik the Red, and yeah.
Yeah, Feuerwerk, the Gash stuff is my own stuff, like short stories, just trying whatever, usually kind of like horror themed, or it's always like dark, but funny stuff, I think. But then Feuerwerk, I teamed up with this friend of mine who I still do comics with, and he was a poet of some kind back then, I guess. And we decided to do like super experimental comics, and we did it all like the opposite way of what you're supposed to do, like do the drawings first and then come up with text and then switch everything around, cut up technique, whatever, like silly nonsense. And somehow we ended up with like a kind of longer story, and we got it published by this French publisher. I don't know if it works, to be honest, that comic. I haven't read it for 25 years. It could be that it's like really pretentious and silly, but maybe it's good. I don't know. I think we were not being like super serious. It was still, we still had fun doing it. It's not like we were like, but it was an experiment, and we did a couple of those experimental comics until that was done, I guess.
And how was that received? Because clearly, you got traction as a creator, because you've now done several comics since, including this important one that was just published on Basquait.
I'm sorry, was that a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, even though you were being playful and experimental, it seemed to your career got traction.
Oh, sorry, I don't know what traction means.
Oh, you got it's not like your career stopped. It continued, and then you've grown, right?
Right. Yeah. But I don't know. I got there was after that Feuerwerk, that experimental thing. I decided I really wanted to do like a proper like comic, or like a graphic novel, like a long story, not just this little short experimental thing, but like a proper, like a proper comic, like what I grew up with, whatever. And for some reason I got super stuck. For almost 10 years I redrew the same 5 pages and didn't finish anything. I just kept like it I wanted it to be perfect, because it was supposed to be my first real comic, and it had to be like perfect. And so I just read it the same. I think I did like 100 pages of the same 5 pages 20 times or something like that. I don't know. I got into like a real. I had a real problem finishing stuff, and then finally I finished a comic book called Lost Highway about Hank Williams, your country singer, which we haven't got in these slides. But that was my first proper comic that I could show to people so they could see that I could do like a real comic and not just experimental stuff like Feuerwerk.
We have some of the Feuerwerk here on the slide. Tell us what am I supposed to be looking at here in terms of experimental, what's going, what were you guys going crazy with here in these couple of slides or in these couple of panels?
First of all, they're all drawn from photos. And they are all completely randomly arranged. Doesn't make sense if I'm pointing at something, does it? Can you see I'm pointing? You can see I'm pointing. The one on the left is just random photos. Then the one in the middle is my friend. I took a bunch of photos of. That's got like a sequence. He kind of gets closer. And then the third page on the right is also a friend, but then it's mixed up with some other drawings of a snake from somewhere. And to be honest, I can't even remember what the story was about. Something about a guy who's in love with someone, but nothing happens. And then there's snakes. We were both heavily inspired by David Lynch and stuff like that. This was in the 90s. You know, everybody was into David Lynch.
Yeah, I love this kind of, where it's really twisting your brain and you don't actually have, it's hard to find the narrative, but maybe your brain puts the narrative together in whatever ways. What about
we were really into that, to like play with the reader and disturb them and all that. Yeah, I like David Lynch, surrealism, stuff like that.
You also do webcomics, Søren.
Yeah, I did one.
Mm-hmm. Was that a very different process for you? And how did you get that out to your readers? And did you find a readership with this comic?
I put it out on Webtoons. Webtoons? Yeah, Webtoons. And last time I looked, there was a bunch of people who had read it, but it's only 30 pages long, and I didn't continue it, which kind of is a little sad, because I think I really started something I really enjoyed, that was really fun and nice. And it kind of ends on like an open, it's supposed to continue, but then somehow I never got back to it. I don't really know why. It's one of those things, you're full of good ideas and then suddenly you do something else and you never come back. I still think about going back, but it's,
When you were creating for a webcomic, did it change the way you create when you're, doing your drawing and inking?
No, because at first it wasn't really, it was just supposed to be a normal comic, and then I found out about Webtoons and I decided to retool it into a web comic, and then you have to change the pages completely, split them up, and you can play with you have one image, and then you have like black you scroll down for 2 minutes, and then you have the next picture, and you can create like a sense of time that's really different from paper comics. Of course, you can have a few black pages in a paper comic, but it's somehow different when you scroll. It's like more like a movie, maybe. That was fun to play with. I think, I should go back to it, because they tell me it's the future, but I don't know. Maybe that was a few years back. Maybe it's not the future anymore. Maybe paper comics are back. Maybe. Growing.
Yeah, it seems to be. The sales in comics, at least in the US this year, were like better than they've ever been. Really.
I know. Yeah, I saw that yesterday. I was shocked, because it feels like 2 months ago you were reading like, oh, it's like a horrible, and now suddenly it goes up.
So so now as we kind of move into your contemporary moment, Actually, I'm gonna take you first to Erik the Red, because chronologically, that's 2014, right? When that was first published. I don't know
Yeah.
when the translation was published, but can you, like, let's do a little bit of this, and then we'll kind of go back and talk about the Basquiat.
Yeah.
I love this comic from what I've seen, and can you just guide us a little bit through the process of, you know, idea to actual materialization to creation on the page, starting with this image, first image?
So too much coffee. This book is something I can talk about forever. So I will try and make it a shortish. You know, I talked about that Hank Williams book I did, The Country Guy, and I did that because I was staying a lot in the States at that point because I had an American girlfriend, and I needed to do a comics project, so I picked Hank Williams because he had been to town. This was kind of random, so I did like an American story, and then I decided, maybe I should do something, you know, closer to where I come from. And then I was thinking, it's funny because in Denmark, Vikings used to be like the least popular thing because nobody wants to hear about Vikings in Denmark. I mean, no one. It's like the most old school, boring, hammy, silly, shitty subject you can decide to make a comic about back then. So I thought, okay, I'll do a comic about Vikings. That could be fun to make it like, you know, interesting again. Because I wasn't really interested in comics, in Vikings myself, but I thought it would be a nice challenge to take that. And then I thought I knew everything about Vikings, which I didn't at all. So I had to read for like a whole year about Vikings. And then I decided to do a story about the guy who found Greenland, Erik the Red, who's like a real figure, historical figure, they think. So I spent 6 years on this project. So this was like my big final actual first graphic novel thick book, because the Hank Williams one was only 50 pages, so that was like, you know, this was the first big one. And then I can tell you this picture is heavily inspired by have you seen Conan the Barbarian, the old one? Do you remember the ending where he's King Conan and he's sitting in a chair and he has a beard and stuff? That's what I drew this from. Of
I
course, there's
love it.
Odin.
Yeah.
There's Odin in the background with one eye and stuff like that. So
yeah, in fact, there's a motif. We won't see it in these couple of pages that come, but I see this swirl in the kind of eye a couple of pages into the comic. You're establishing a mood here. You're establishing the protagonist, the central character, the sort of beautiful kind of way, the triangular shape and the sense of, you know, dominance and solidity. When we jump into the launch of the story, which is maybe the most important part of storytelling, can you walk us through these first pages?
Yeah, it's kind of it's a flashback from later in the story. We start with the flashback. It's a little. I think now it's not a good way to start a story with a flashback from a story that's not even started yet, I think. But I think that as like a beginning, if you don't know it's a flashback, it's a very good start. And it's maybe one of the most morbid things I read about in the Viking sagas, about this guy he's sent up. There's a Viking ship stuck in the ice in Greenland, and they want to collect the bones so it's easier to cook. The sailors on the ship cook them in a big pot, so you know you can get the skeletons free of meat, so it's easier to carry them back home. So you only get like the bones and skulls, and that's what he's doing. He's literally cooking his Viking friends to be able to bring them back home. And I guess I thought that was just a fun way to start this comic, because it's literally the most morbid, weird thing in the whole book. There's other stuff too that's kind of weird, but this is one of the worst. Yeah, so I guess I wanted to start on like a really like a hard, like a good, strong note with that.
Søren, let me just ask, when you're pacing your story here, as you launch it, the paneling is very important, also the point of view, and then the so-called lensing, how close we are, how far away we are. What, if you can recall, like what some of your decisions were here with the three kind of smaller panels, almost like, quick, fixing us in the setting, and then kind of pulling out for those longer moments of, absorbing. Yeah.
He's being watched by these Inuit people in Greenland. They are watching him, and they are saying some stuff. I can't even remember what they're saying. Something like, "What's going on?" They're watching this Norwegian guy. I guess that's what he is, because they were Norwegians, the Vikings who came to Greenland. They're watching him cooking his friends, and they're wondering what the hell is he doing. So he's being watched. That's why there's the panel pulls in and out. Yeah.
I love it. And the coloring here, the palette that you choose.
Well, I'm going for something that's really a frozen atmosphere with some yellow to do a contrast. And then there's that moon is like Odin only had that one eye, and there's always like a moon, like one eye watching these guys, whatever they're doing. There's basically always a full moon in Greenland in this story.
Remarkable. I love it. Can't wait to continue reading it. Why choose, as we move to Basquait, or I'm sorry, Søren, did you want to add something?
No.
As we move to Basquiat, with your co-creator Julien VOLOJ'S, why choose this project? I know there's already quite a bit out there on Basquiat. So yeah, why this project?
Well, it started with I was trying to make this French agent called Nicolas Grivel. I was trying to make him sell this Hank Williams book I was talking about, and he didn't. He was like, I don't know. But somehow it inspired him to suddenly approach me at a festival in Poland and say, "Hey, Søren, I have this great idea. I think you would be perfect for this project about Basquiat." He said, and I was like, "What, Basquiat?" Because I was a big fan of Basquiat ever since I was 18 or something. He was my first like proper art idol, so to speak. Even back when I was still thinking, "Oh, should I become like a proper artist and not a comic artist?" He was like the big thing, one of the first ones. And maybe for my early comics, I did have some influence from him, but yeah, he was a big deal for me. So I was like, yeah, immediately I was, that's a great idea. I would love to do that. So that's how it came about. That was, they approached me, and I was immediately excited because this Basquiat.
And did you know you would be working with VOLOJ'S on this?
Yeah. But yeah. I hadn't read any of his things back then, so I got that Ghetto Brother he's sitting with there, and yeah, I thought it was really great. So yeah, there was no doubt.
Can you share a little bit about the kind of process? Was it a script that you got, or did you guys go back and forth together? How did it kind of, the whole process work?
The script was pretty much complete. I think it was just ready to go, and I didn't really have any what do you call it, protests, anything against it. Or I think we just started on it, and then we discussed how to do it. If I should make it look like some kind of Basquiat drawing, so it's kind of inspired by him in a way, in that I feel like he's really a fast painter. Or he paints like he's not like doing like little details too much. He goes fast, and I try to do the same with the drawings within a limit, because you have to show what's in the text. You can't just go too crazy. You have to have a little bit of discipline. Probably Basquiat had a ton of discipline too, but he feels like it's very energetic. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So I try to duplicate the energy, and then the colors are also all taken from his paintings, like literally, pipette and Photoshop.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's very, it's your unique kind of style, but at the same time, you feel Basquiat there very much all the time through the colors and the line work that you do. About how long was it, kind of from start to finish, for you in the creating of the story?
For me, personally, it took a year, I think, with the coloring and everything. I'm not sure how long Julian had spent on it beforehand, because it was more or less finished when I got it. So I have no idea. But I know he talked to a bunch. He lives in New York, so he talked to a bunch of people who knew Basquiat and his old gallerists and friends and stuff. So I'm guessing he spent quite a lot of time getting it all down.
Søren, it's really interesting too. There are moments in the comic book biography where you include figures that are like basically Keith Haring and others. So a way to bring the sense of the moment that Basquiat was creating in and living in without telling us like Keith Haring, but you do that, it seems like, with a lot of cultural figures and cultural kind of iconography. Warhol, the Campbell Soup, and then there's other important figures that are sort of there, present in and through the drawing itself. I love that. I love the cartoony figure moment with, and then you're like, hold on, this is Keith Haring.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about, if you could walk us through your process from idea to final panel layout. You mentioned already the very deliberate color palette, and the line work. But if we start with the opening, and it is a frame narration, right? Can you walk us through these first couple of pages?
Sure. This is it kind of this beginning in particular goes back a lot to what I did when I was doing underground comics in the 90s. This figure crawling out of the TV. This is, for those who haven't read the comic or seen it, it's kind of Basquiat's alter ego. It's a figure he would paint a few times, and then in the comic we've used it as it's kind of his friend in the comic who talks to him. But he goes back to, he's like a kind of scary and friendly type, but the whole way he looks and stuff, that brings me, when I was doing it, I was like, yeah, this is like, what I used to do in comics in a way. It looks like it, and I tried to bring that feel back. So the beginning is a little spookier than the rest of the comic. Of course, it's also, as you can see, he's it starts out with him being Basquiat is kind of doesn't feel so good, and then I should probably not say anymore.
What about tell me about decisions here in terms of you know, opening. We have a kind of splash page, and then we have that panel at the bottom that leads us over to the television screen, and then we have, you know, the rhythm here that you create with the 3 panels on the top, and then we have a 4-panel sequence. When you're thinking about the layout, what are you thinking about?
You know what? For this, again, to keep it kind of energetic, I didn't do so much layout for much of the comic. I was looking at the text, and then maybe I did did some lines in the text, but I didn't actually do so many preliminary sketches. I just basically started drawing, and then it just ran for the most part. And this is how I used to do comics in the early stages, where I didn't, you know, I was a big artist. I didn't have to do like sketches. I just did like a flow of consciousness thing, and it was something I really enjoyed doing back then, when you didn't have to think too much about it. You just let it flow, and I kind of went back to this a little bit, even though I couldn't, because obviously there was the story, but I still tried to you know, have that feeling of flow in the comics. So it's not super well thought out, to be honest, the layout.
Yeah, no, but of course, as this relates back to your point earlier, where you really wanted to bring that energy that you felt Basquiat brings, right? With even though a lot of self-discipline, very kind of energetic art, right? And something like this moment in the comic, kind of midway through, or 3/4 of the way through, a splash page like this is just, I mean, this could be blown up and put up in a gallery, right? But maybe you can tell us about this moment in the story, and then your decisions as to why you would want to do a whole page for this.
This is I forget her name. There's a lady. She's actually burning Basquiat's paintings because she's really mad with him for good reason, because she just found him in bed with the Madonna of all the people. She's understandably pissed about that. So she takes his paintings and burns them in the street. And I think it's actually happened. And this was my decision to make this as a splash page. No, I mean, Julien or Nicolas, the agent, he doesn't. Once we start the comic, he doesn't interfere at all. He just lets us do whatever we want, of course. But Julien gave me completely free hands as well for the layout and all that. So I decided this should be a big splash moment. And it gave me the opportunity to do this almost like a painting with the figure again from the beginning. So like paint again. This is like what I would do sometimes when I was 19, copying Basquiat, do something like this. I have some comics that kind of look like this as well. I guess I just wanted to go back to that feeling, and now I had an excuse to do it for this comic. I think that's what went into it.
Søren, you mentioned earlier that you really did pay attention to the color palette, the colors here. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I literally took them from in Photoshop. I found a bunch of Basquiat photos, and I just literally took in Photoshop. There's a pipette. Is it a pipette? Do you call it that? Where you can pick colors and save them in a little square box for like you have all your colors. And I just picked colors directly from his paintings. All those really 80s style like powerful blue and green and yellow and pang. We call them pangfarver in Denmark. So yeah, I took the colors and we used them for the comic, for the coloring.
Really remarkable, the energy and the way it ties us into the life and his art. This is for me, who, you know, I spend a lot of time on superhero comics, especially Latino superhero comics. Was a particularly fun moment. Maybe you can walk us through these pages.
Yeah, it's Basquiat is. I call him Basquiat because I think it's supposed to be, you said, like in a French accent. I don't know if that sounds super stupid in French, but that's what do you call him in the States?
I think you're right to call him Basquiat. I've been calling him both. So,
but I guess he what did he call himself? He probably didn't say Basquiat. He probably said Basquiat or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, Søren.
It doesn't matter. But anyway, he's super happy because he just talked to Andy Warhol for the first time, and no, maybe not the first time. He got a deal with Andy Warhol. Something. He's super happy about something with Andy Warhol, who helped him. So he runs out of this bar and he's like excited, and he was into comics, Basquiat, like super early superhero stuff, which is a thing I was never really that much into. To be honest, like I said, I was in France. I read Franco-Belgium, Asterix. That's what I read when, you know, I could have read superheroes. So, but Julian was excited, and he thought it should be like a Spider-Man moment. And I was like, okay, yeah, let's do that. And so that's what it is. That's what you got here. He's Spider-Man. He's jumping literally exactly like Spider-Man, and he owns all of New York, as you can see. He's like, that's the skyline, and he's even painted the whole, you know, sky in his colors and stuff. It's his big moment. That's what it's supposed to mean. And you can see in his face, he's like super intense and focused, and now is, you know, the time. And he's Spider-Man. He can fly. So that's probably the highlight of his whole life right there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all downhill. No, it wasn't. There was more good stuff, but I think this was probably his like one of his best moments.
Mm-hmm.
I would guess.
Did you find yourself? You talk about kind of the earlier ways that you would create your comics. Did you find here with this project any interest in looking at graffiti, or was it really just kind of being inspired and looking again at the work of Basquiat?
What was the first part of the question again?
Yeah,
Sorry.
just how was graffiti at all a part of your kind of imagination when you were visualizing this comic biography?
Well, a little bit. I mean, I grew up in the 80s, and I had like graffiti friends and hip hop friends, and I was not into hip hop and graffiti back then, but I certainly, you know, was aware about it and knew, and I think it looks really cool. A lot of it, especially like old school graffiti. So it's certainly something I was aware of. I'm a little regretting. I would have liked to have. I was talking to some Polish graffiti guy, and we decided next time I was doing a comic like this, he should do the graffiti on the walls. If you know, because this takes place in New York, obviously, and you could have done a whole lot of like graffiti on every building in New York, and I didn't do so much, but we could have done more.
Well, it works. I think it's an amazing comic biography, and honestly, there's so many ways that you and Julian could have told this or shown this story, but I love the way you focus on his journey, the art, but then the complications and the conflicts and struggles. What are you working on now? What's next for you, Søren?
I'm doing with Julian. We're in the works of a new project, but I can't really say so much about that at the moment. But we have something in mind we're talking about. And then I'm doing with this Danish author who's like a big deal in Denmark called Kim Leine, and I made him do a comic script for me, which is like a super big thing for me because he's maybe one of the most well-known authors in Denmark. So we did already the first part of this big apocalyptic science fiction comic, and I'm working on the second part of that. And then I'm thinking of doing the second part of this Viking Erik the Red book. That's something I've been thinking about for 6 years since it, came out, the first one. And finally, I think I'm kind of maybe ready to go back to Vikings because, like I said, I spent like 6 years doing that book. So I was like, fuck Vikings. Can we swear on this program? It's too late. Yeah, I was not gonna do anything with them, and then maybe now I would like to at some point. So I'm working on a story for that.
Amazing. Søren Mosdal, thank you so much for sharing your time with me and with all of us viewers and listeners. Yeah. And I look forward to all of the work that you will be doing in the future and going back to the work that you have done. Thank you, Søren.
Yeah, thank you. No problem. It was a pleasure.